You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and my prediction came true. The Milwaukee Bucks season has come to an end. The Miami Heat are going to the Eastern Conference Finals. And truthfully, this wasn't a bold prediction or anything. It was pretty obvious that once Giannis was ruled out, the Bucks really didn't have much of a chance of winning. I mean, I give them credit. They played hard. That was a close game for really a good chunk of that game. The Bucks were up by 13 at one point. I mean, it almost looked like for a moment that they were going to do this thing. But ultimately, they just missed Giannis too much. You don't need me to tell you this. Without him, the Bucks offense is lackluster, to say the least. I mean, I give Chris Middleton credit. He tried his best. He took 25 shots, which, I mean, is what he needed to do, and he dropped 23. Now, he only went 2 for 9 from beyond the arc and 8 for 25 from the field. I'm just trying to soften the landing here. I know that this is a really tough pill for Bucks fans to swallow. A lot of people picked you to represent the East in the NBA Finals. And then you get thrashed by the Heat. Giannis gets hurt, comes back in Game 4, gets hurt again, and then that's it. Really tough pill for you to swallow if you're a Bucks fan. Again, I'm just trying to lessen the impact. And now there are real question marks about that roster. After next year, Giannis can become a free agent. There are rumors that he may look to leave. Now, he shot those down pretty quickly yesterday, but I think it's fair to wonder what the Bucks are going to do from here. Let's say for a moment that Giannis is serious about staying in Milwaukee for the next 5 years after next year. This current core can't get it done. Giannis is going to need some help. Chris Middleton is a really good player, but I don't know if he can be the second best player on a championship winning team. I don't think Eric Bledsoe can be the third best player on a championship winning team. Can it be Brook Lopez? Probably not. The Bucks need a major overhaul. Use this as a wake-up call. Say to Giannis, hey, look, you're really serious about staying here? We want you here, obviously. Look at what we've done to reinvent the roster around you. It's not terribly hard to construct a roster built around Giannis. All you need are shooters. Now, the Bucks do have that with Middleton and Bledsoe and Lopez and DiVincenzo and Korver and Connaughton. But at the end of the day, they're just not good enough. It's nothing against those guys. I don't think they're bad players, but look, the lack of playoff success doesn't lie. I fear that if you roll this same roster out next year and it's another early playoff exit for the Bucks, Giannis may decide to jump ship. Despite what he said, Kyrie Irving, before he jumped to the Nets, said he wanted to be a Celtic long term. Look how that ended up. At the end of the day, NBA players care about winning over everything. Market size really doesn't matter that much. Does it matter a little bit? Yes. But winning matters exponentially more. It also may be fair to wonder if Mike Budenholzer is the right coach for this team. I like Budenholzer. I think he's a very good coach, but this is getting kind of close to Armageddon here, if you're the Bucks. Until Giannis puts pen to paper on an extension, everything has to be on the table. You have to go all out on winning next year. I mean, the Eastern Conference is going to get a lot better next year, with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving being 100% healthy. Also, the Sixers could have a bounce-back year now that they've moved on from Brett Brown. Make no mistake about it, it's put-up-or-shut-up time for Milwaukee. Now, having said that, if the nightmare scenario happens, let's say the Bucks make a bunch of changes, or they don't, and they're not as good as they were this year. They were the best team in the NBA this year in terms of the regular season record. They finished with 56 wins. If the Bucks take a major step back, Giannis may change his mind and he may want out. You don't want to deal with that if you're the Bucks. You have to go all in on winning now. Prove to him that you're serious about putting a title contender around him. Whether that's a new supporting cast, a new coach, or both. The last thing you want if you're the Bucks is to either trade Giannis or see him sign somewhere else. It's a distinct possibility if you don't rebuild this roster. But I don't want to take anything away from the Heat. I spent enough time talking about the Bucks. The Heat only played 7 guys yesterday. They were shorthanded too. Tyler Hero didn't play. Kelly Olynyk didn't play. Yet they still won. This was despite the fact that of those 7 guys, 3 of them, Duncan Robinson, Kendrick Nunn, and Andre Iguodala, combined for just 14 points. Neither team really shot the ball that well. I mean, the Heat were good from the field, and they got to the free throw line a lot. And they hit on their free throws, too, 22 for 24. But from beyond the arc, they shot 11 for 31. The Bucks got to the free throw line a lot, too. They only shot 73%, 19 for 26. 36% from the field, 27% from 3. The Heat did a good job of penetrating because they didn't have to deal with Giannis. They took advantage of that. Good for them. It's why you saw Jimmy Butler go off. It's why you saw Goran Dragic go off. It's why you saw Jay Crowder go off. It's why you saw Bam go off. I give the Heat a ton of credit for what they did in this series. They stifled Giannis. Their defense was fantastic. Eric Spoelstra has done a sensational job. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the Heat beat the Celtics or the Raptors in the Eastern Conference Finals. Moving on now to Lakers-Rockets. And you want to talk about a team taking advantage of their opponent. That's what the Lakers didn't do in the first half. Then Frank Vogel had the light bulb moment, and they did that in the second half. In the first half, they were down by 3. They really weren't using their size that well. Charles Barkley was killing them for it. On the halftime show, I give Chuck credit. He was 100% right. But then you saw LeBron use his size. You saw Anthony Davis use his size. The Lakers went small. Kyle Kuzma got more minutes. He dropped 14. I really like Kyle Kuzma. I've said that before. I'll say it again. And they got a vintage performance from Rajon Rondo. Rondo dropped 21 and 9 in this game. The most points he's had in the playoffs this year. The most points he's had since February 10th against the Suns. Playoff Jimmy Butler showed up for the Heat. Playoff Rajon Rondo is showing up for the Lakers. It's really incredible, man. There are some players that just rise to the moment when those lights are on bright. You either have that gene or you don't. You cannot teach that. I mean, quite frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if the Lakers rolled out a lineup of Rondo at the 1, either KCP or Danny Green at the 2, LeBron at the 3, Kuzma at the 4, and Anthony Davis at the 5. I don't think the Rockets can stop that lineup. Their perimeter defense was good, give them credit, but on the interior, they have nothing. Harden and Westbrook showed up offensively. I give them full credit. Harden, you knew was going to get his. He nearly had a triple-double, 33, 9, and 9. Westbrook was a little bit more of a question mark. He played well. Give him credit. He dropped 30. But at the end of the day, this just isn't a good matchup for the Rockets. I've said it a bunch. They don't have the size. The Lakers dominated in the interior. You know the Rockets are going to dominate on the perimeter. That's what they do. The way to counter that is to go inside. It is to wear them down in the low post. Again, it may not be the most exciting brand of basketball in the world, but it works. Alright, now it's time to preview tonight's 2 games, and I will start with Raptors-Celtics. For the Raptors, they really need Pascal Siakam to wake up. Siakam has only scored more than 20 points in one game this series. Game 4. The Raptors won that game. That's not a coincidence. Siakam is their best player. Kyle Lowry has shown up. Fred VanVleet isn't shooting well, but he's still contributing offensively. He's getting inside. He's penetrating. I mean, he's finding ways to contribute. Siakam really isn't. Anunoby is finding ways to contribute. Siakam isn't. Ibaka is finding ways to contribute. Siakam isn't. You sensing a theme? Everyone with the Raptors is pulling their weight. Siakam really isn't. This is a guy who was the Raptors' best player this year. He led them in points, was second in rebounds, shot the ball efficiently. He is no-showing at the worst possible time. He needs to step up. As for the Celtics, there are a couple things that they need to do. Number one, don't change anything on the defense. What you're doing is working. Your perimeter defense has been insane. Keep it up. But number two, I want them to get another unheralded guy involved. And what I mean by that is, you take a look at their 3 wins this series. Games 1, 2, and 5. Game 1, Smart went off. Dropped 21 points. Daniel Tice had a double-double. Game 2, Smart went off again. He had 19 points and hit 6 threes. Game 5, again, Smart got his. Brad Wanamaker had his best game of the playoffs with 15 points off the bench. Daniel Tice dropped 15 points. The Celtics need another guy to step up. They've done a great job of compensating for the Gordon Hayward injury. They just need someone to do it again. Moving on now to Clippers Nuggets. And the Clippers need to get everyone cooking here. They're not playing at their full potential. Now they're still winning, which is scary, but they could be better. Ivica Zubac hasn't been great. Lou Williams hasn't been great. Montrezl Harrell hasn't been great. Jermichael Green hasn't been great. Landry Shamet hasn't been great. Yeah, Harrell and Green had moments where they looked really good, but I expect more from them. I expect consistency. They need to get everyone cooking at 100%. It's just that simple. As for the Nuggets, they need to get Jamal Murray's head screwed on straight. Murray dominated in the Jazz series, but he really hasn't done that in this series. Patrick Beverley has done a fantastic job defending him. Murray should still be able to get his. All due respect to Patrick Beverley, and I truly do mean with all due respect, because he's a great perimeter defender. But Jamal Murray is the kind of player that you'd expect to go off regardless of who's defending him. I mean, it's no coincidence that the game that Patrick Beverley only played 15 minutes in, Game 2, and he ended up leaving early with an injury, that Murray went off for 27 points. We all know that Jokic is going to get his. That goes without saying. Jamal Murray needs to step up. It's just that simple. Moving on now to hockey. And obviously, I gotta start with Stars Golden Knights. And I was really surprised when I saw Robin Lehner in net for the Golden Knights. I didn't think that made sense. Marc-Andre Fleury played great for the Golden Knights in Game 1. He only gave up 1 goal. I mean, it really didn't make a lot of sense to me why he got the start in the first place, but I can't argue with results. He played great. Now Pete DeBoer is going to go back to Lehner? What's going on? But I'll give DeBoer credit. It worked. At the end of the day, I'll repeat myself. You can't argue with results. When you have Robin Lehner pitching a shutout, stopping all 24 shots, I don't care how you ended up making that decision. The decision worked. And I'm really happy for Lehner. I'm rooting for him hard. I saw a report that said he's going to get a long-term contract offer from the Golden Knights. He deserves it. Loved him with the Islanders. Very open with his battle with depression. It's really great that he was so open about it and was able to conquer his demons. No one's rooting for him harder than me outside of the state of Nevada. As for the Stars, I really didn't think they were terrible in this game. They just had a 10-minute stretch in the second period when they forgot how to play hockey. They made some mistakes, and the Golden Knights capitalized. Sometimes that's all it takes. You can play a perfect game for 50 minutes, but in those 10 minutes, you can lose a game. Again, I didn't think they were terrible, but they're going to need to focus on playing a full 60 minutes tomorrow. But now it's time to preview Islanders Lightning. And for the Islanders, hey, they can't be any worse. That's seriously how they need to look at this. Alright, we got the bad game out of our systems. Let's move on. Let's forget about it. The 24-hour rule applies here. For those of you who don't know, you can be happy about something for 24 hours, or you can be upset about it for 24 hours, but once that 25th hour hits, that's it. Forget about it. Put this out of your mind. Go back to playing Islanders hockey, defense first hockey. Again, they can't be much worse. As for who they're going to put in net, I have no idea. If they went with Grice, I wouldn't have a problem with it. If they went with Varlamov, I wouldn't have a problem with it. If they went with Chris Gibson, I wouldn't have a problem with it. If they brought Billy Smith into the bubble and started him, I wouldn't have a problem with it. As for the Lightning, just keep doing what you're doing. For God's sake, you scored 8 goals on Monday. You only gave up 2. Do I need to say any more than that? Keep doing what you're doing. It's not rocket science. There are some NFL extensions to talk about, and a couple of them broke while I was editing yesterday's show, so I didn't come back up to my studio and record something about them. I could have, but I wanted to save it for today because I really wanted to talk about fantasy football yesterday. So better late than never. I'm going to start with the DeAndre Hopkins extension. A 2-year, $54.5 million extension that makes Hopkins the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. And he negotiated that deal himself. Shout out to him. There's no question that DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. In fact, if you wanted to call him the best wide receiver in the NFL, I'd be okay with that. He's made 3 straight All-Pros, 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He's made 4 Pro Bowls in the last 5 years. You don't need me to read you his resume. You know how fantastic he is. And I don't have a problem with him being the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. What I have a problem with is making him the highest paid non-quarterback in league history. That's tough for me to get behind. Hopkins is not worth that. The highest paid wide receiver in NFL history before this was Julio Jones. In terms of AAV, he was making $22 million a year. And the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL before this was Khalil Mack, who was making $23.5 million a year. Hopkins shattered that. I mean, come on, are we going to get 30 mil wide receivers soon? If Terry McLaurin or Cortland Sutton keep up their great play, are they going to get 30 mil a year? 20 mil would have been a fair range for Hopkins. I could have lived with 23, and even 24, I could get behind a little bit. 27.25 mil a year is ridiculous. He's gonna get his, we all know that. The combination of him, Kyler Murray, and Cliff Kingsbury should be insane. But he's not going to be worth 27 mil a year. That's ridiculous. Moving on now to Kareem Hunt signing a 2-year extension with the Browns, worth $13.25 million a year. And you can't not love this deal for the Browns. Do they need Kareem Hunt? No. They have Nick Chubb. But they took a chance on him when no one else would, and Hunt made them look really smart. I understand he only played in 8 games, but he was still getting his. When you look at yards per attempt, it wasn't that different from how it was with the Chiefs. He's still really, really good. The Browns are set up fantastically for the future. You want to tell me they don't need Kareem Hunt? They should have saved the money? I get where you're coming from, but according to Spottrack.com, the Browns have over $34 million in cap space. It's not like they're hemorrhaging money. When you have a talent like Kareem Hunt, you keep him around. This is a great move for the Browns. It makes a ton of sense to keep him around. And I'll say it again, it's put up or shut up time for Baker Mayfield. If he doesn't succeed now, he's a bust. Moving on now to Jalen Ramsey getting a massive extension. Tre'Davious White just got his big boy contract. Byron Jones got his big boy contract in the offseason. Jalen Ramsey shattered both of those contracts. Ramsey is now getting $105 million over 5 years. That's $21 million a year. Look, we all know the talent that Jalen Ramsey is. The Rams gave up a second-round pick to get him last year, and he was great for him. Make no mistake about it. The Pro Football Focus grades on him are not where they should be. He only has 1 year over 73. That's very surprising. They should be a lot higher. I mean, I don't like Ramsey shattering the marks set by Jones and White. White broke Jones's mark with his contract, but it wasn't by an exorbitant amount. Ramsey shattered that contract. He shattered both contracts. I mean, he salted the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. It's not that he doesn't deserve to be paid like a top corner. He does, but not by this much. I mean, now the Tre'Davious White contract looks like the steal of the century. I understand that the Rams really needed to keep him in the fold. They traded 2 firsts and a 4th to get him. It would look really bad if they didn't lock him up. But to give him this contract is tough for me to get behind. It's not that Ramsey won't get his. He will. But I don't think he'll play up to this contract. There will be better corners than him this year. Switching back to basketball, there was another piece of NBA news that I really want to talk about, and that is the Thunder and Billy Donovan mutually parting ways. Donovan had an expiring contract for this year, so when the Thunder were eliminated, that was it. Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN had some interesting tidbits about why this happened. Sam Presti is thinking that he could go with a full-on rebuild. Move on from Chris Paul, build around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, just blow the whole thing up. Donovan didn't want to be a part of that, and I don't blame him. He's established himself as one of the better coaches in the NBA. In his 5 years with the Thunder, they never finished with a losing record. I mean, they were expected to be in the doldrums of the league. They ended up as the 5th seed. Donovan is going to get his pick of coaching jobs. There were rumors that the Bulls were interested in talking to him. I could see that. Donovan does work well with young players. Obviously, we know how successful he was in college. And that's a situation that's different from the Thunder. The Bulls are on the way up. They're going to add to their young core. The Thunder are going to be on their way down if they decimate the roster. There were also rumors that the Sixers could get involved. He would make sense for them, but I think Darvin Ham is the way to go for them. I've said that before. I'll say it again. Bucks assistant coach. Very highly respected. Donovan is going to have his pick of coaching opportunities. He's going to be linked to every available coaching job for as long as he's unemployed. As for the Thunder and how they're going to move on from this, they're going to hire some young, up-and-coming assistant to lead them into the future. Someone who we've never heard of before, similar to how Kenny Atkinson was before he got to the Nets. I mean, it's possible they could even go after Atkinson himself, although I don't know if he would want that job. Presti signaling that they're going to go with a full-on rebuild does not make the Thunder an appealing job. And also, this is a team that has never been able to keep its guys. Durant leaves, Westbrook gets traded, Harden gets traded, Ibaka gets traded, Paul George gets traded. Carmelo Anthony leaves. The Thunder just aren't an appealing team. And you add to that their impending rebuild, they're going to have a tough time getting a quality head coach. Alright, here's my interview with Jeff Benedict. Usually I talk about interviews at the beginning of each show, but I didn't do that here because I wanted to brag about me being right. I mean, granted, it wasn't a crazy prediction or anything, but still, I like being right. Here's the interview. Hope you enjoy it. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Jeff Benedict, the author of the Dynasty. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
All right. Before we get going, I just have to say this. I'm a Jets fan. I am a huge Jets fan. You have no idea the hell that I am going to go through to conduct this interview, so I hope that you appreciate it, Jeff. I hope the listener appreciates it, because this is pure hell for me.
I appreciate that.
Okay. So, I'm glad you get my sense of humor.
I do.
So, how exactly did Robert Kraft come to own the Patriots?
Oh, well, that's a big question. I mean, it's not one thing, but it certainly starts with him becoming a season ticket holder in 1971, the year the Patriots moved into Foxborough, and watching the team be a perennial loser, and sitting there year after year in the stands along with all the other fans, and he was thinking about how, if he owned the team, how differently he would run things and do things. And as his business career advances and the Patriots continued to become, worse and worse, he actually became real serious about buying it. And the book, the beginning of the book is this odyssey that he goes on to get the team, starting with acquiring the parking lots, then buying the dilapidated stadium out of bankruptcy, which gave him the leverage to ultimately acquire the team from an ownership group in St. Louis that was planning to move the Patriots to St. Louis in 1994.
That would have been fun. I wouldn't have minded them moving.
That would have changed history for sure.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I liked about this story, is that there's so many places where history could have been drastically different had something, simple not happened.
On that point, I could not have done a better segue myself. What's the full story behind Bill Belichick resigning as Jets head coach on a napkin and then jumping to the Patriots? You want to talk about history being different? That's a history-making moment.
It's a profound moment that it not only forever changes the history of the New England Patriots, but it has a massive impact on the history of the New York Jets. And I would argue it changes the course of history for the National Football League.
I agree.
But I think to understand the roots of that decision that Belichick makes, which is so inexplicable in the moment, is you have to go back to 1996 when Belichick gets fired in Cleveland, and Bill Parcells, who at that point has a very fractured relationship with Kraft, but goes to Kraft and argues strongly that they need to hire Bill Belichick. And the reason Parcells is doing that is because he knows that Belichick is going to go to Miami and become Jimmy Johnson's defensive coordinator, and Parcells doesn't want to coach against him twice a year. And so he's trying to convince Kraft to talk to him. He also knows that he can't talk to Belichick because Parcells' relationship with him is strained. So he convinces Kraft to do it. Kraft flies out to the Combines in Indianapolis, and that's when he meets Bill Belichick for the first time. And they spend hours together, getting to know each other, talking. And one of the things that Kraft came away from in that meeting was that Belichick was very different than Parcells. And so he does hire him. He brings Belichick to New England to be an assistant coach under Parcells for the 96 season. That whole year, the acrimony between Kraft and Parcells is out in public display. Everyone's talking about it. It's in the news. Will McDonough's writing about it. But what wasn't visible was that behind the scenes, Kraft is watching Belichick in practice, because Kraft goes to practice a lot. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't assert himself. He just watches. And he was watching the way players like Lawyer Malloy and Ty Law and Teddy Bruschi, who were all these young players on the defense, how they were reacting to Belichick, how he was teaching them, and how they were responding. And in his own mind, he knows he's going to need a new head coach, because he knows that Parcells is leaving. And so he's scouting for a coach. When you get to that Super Bowl that year where the Patriots play the Packers, which is going to be Parcells' last game, prior to that game, the day before, the Patriots had their last walkthrough. And it's a closed practice. There's not supposed to be anybody else there. And Kraft noticed John Bon Jovi walking around the field. And he walked up to him and he said, tell me about your friend. And Bon Jovi's like, you mean Belichick? And he says, yeah. And so Bon Jovi starts telling Kraft how good of a coach he is, because they're good friends. They go way back and to the Giants days. And Kraft's like, he already had made up his mind about what kind of coach he was. He was trying to find out what kind of man he was. And he thought Bon Jovi could enlighten him, because John Bon Jovi knows him. And so Bon Jovi essentially vouches for Belichick. He says all the right things. It's actually a great scene in the book where you have a rock star talking to an owner, and they're discussing the potential hire of a coach. But even after all that, Kraft doesn't hire him, and the only reason he doesn't is because he doesn't trust him enough because of his long history with Parcells. So he cleans house and hires Pete Carroll, and immediately starts to regret it. And Parcells takes Belichick to New York, to the Jets. And for the next 3 years, all Kraft is thinking about is getting Belichick back. And so the reason that backstory is so important is because there's a relationship in place long before Belichick writes that famous note, about resigning as HC of the Jets. And there's a real relationship there. It's different. It's unique. And so when Belichick knows that Carroll's been fired and there's a job opening in New England, he's interested. And I think he saw it as an opportunity to do things that he wouldn't be able to do in New York. And he was interested in working for an owner that he already liked and had a relationship with. I think that was pivotal.
Yeah, and obviously back then there were a bunch of question marks about how long Leon Hess would stay as owner of the Jets, and no one knew who was going to buy the team. Before Woody Johnson actually came into the mix, Charles Dolan was rumored to be buying the Jets. Jim Dolan's father owned the Knicks, owned the Rangers, actually talked about buying the Jets. So history could have been very different if Belichick stayed with the Jets, or if Charles Dolan had even bought the Jets. I mean, history's crazy like that, all the twists and turns it can take. Would you agree with that?
I think the story of the dynasty plays that out in so many places. I mean, the next connection, the Jets have so many ties to this dynasty. The next
they
one
really do. It's really upsetting.
It's interesting, right? Because in the 2001 season, when Mo Lewis takes out Drew Bledsoe, and literally Bledsoe almost dies from the severity of that injury, the severed artery and the blood leaking into his lung, and nobody's aware of it while it's happening because it's not a visible injury. By the time he gets to the ER, they're like frantically trying to save his life. That is another major turning point in history, because it's what enables Belichick to insert his quarterback in the lineup, which he wouldn't have been able to do but for a life-threatening injury like that. And Brady performs the way he does through the second half of that season, and again, history changes. But the Jets are on the scene again. I mean, this is another New York Jets moment where Mo Lewis plays this unlikely role of opening a door for Tom Brady and opening a door for Bill Belichick to do what he wanted to do but really couldn't do before the injury.
I'm going to tell you something that's really upsetting. The last playoff victory the Jets had was January 16th, 2011, against the Patriots.
Yeah.
In that time span, the Patriots have won 3 Super Bowls.
Yeah, and been to 5.
Oh, God. Makes me want to tear my hair out.
Well, and that game you mentioned, that playoff game, was a stunning upset. I mean, the Jets really, just a couple weeks before that, the Patriots had annihilated them, and they, of course, beat them earlier in that season too. They were so heavily favored, and I think it's hard not to say they were clearly a superior team that year, but the Jets outplayed them and outperformed them that day and beat them pretty handily.
Yeah, Sanchez had a great game that game. He outplayed Brady.
No, it was the whole team outplayed the Patriots that day, and I think that it is interesting, as you point out, that was the beginning of the second run of the Patriots dynasty. Like that, the next season was a Super Bowl year for them, and they were off to the races again.
Patriots are so good at that, using those bad moments to rejigger themselves and remotivate themselves to get to that mountaintop. It's so crazy. So let me rewind the clock a little bit. What exactly did Belichick see in Tom Brady that no one else saw in the 2000 NFL draft?
Well, I think what he saw, and this is in the book, right? He talks about this in the book. The context that everybody overlooks, because people will say, well, if Belichick thought he was so good, why didn't he pick him before the 199th pick? There's a really easy answer for that. When Belichick came into New England in 2000, just months before he would draft Brady, the Patriots were a losing team. They had a losing record. They had holes everywhere. The one place where they were solid was at quarterback. They had one of the best quarterbacks in the league in Drew Bledsoe, and they had 2 solid backups. At almost every other position on the roster, they had huge deficiencies. So that's the reason that drafting Brady isn't a priority. They don't need a quarterback. It's that simple. They need everything else. So Belichick is drafting, and they're picking tight ends and cornerbacks and running backs and interior linemen and all this stuff. But as the draft wears on, he keeps saying to everyone in the war room, why is Brady still on the board? When there's that scene in the book where he's saying to Scott Pioli, why is he still on the board? There's too much value there. But he still doesn't take him because they need, a right tackle or whatever. And this keeps going on. Eventually, he makes the decision at pick 199 that even though the last thing in the world they need is a 4th quarterback, that there's just way too much value to ignore him any longer, and he takes him. And what does he see that no one else sees? What he sees is he saw what everyone else saw, which was slow foot speed, slow running speed, not the strongest arm in the world, not a good performance at the combine, a negative draft review that's written up about all the things that are wrong. But there's one thing that stands out, and that is that when the Michigan Wolverines are behind and when the clock is running down, is when Brady performs the best. And Belichick had watched him time and time again in huge games in front of 100,000 people bring Michigan back and deliver victories, including in the Orange Bowl against Alabama, where when the chips are down, he seems to play his best. And in Belichick's eyes, that's an intangible quality that very few NFL quarterbacks possess. And it's essential to greatness in the NFL for quarterbacks. And so he saw that early. He zeroed in on it. It's not like he knew that Brady was going to become what he became, but that's what he saw. And then in that first year where Brady doesn't play, but he's basically relegated to the practice squad, he sees him doing that in practice, and he sees leadership skills on the field. He sees guys following him. So by the time of the 2001 season, he really believed after his second training camp that the team would be better off if he started Brady that year, but he can't. And so he doesn't, and that's where the Mo Lewis hit becomes so important.
Now, just a couple things before we get into the next question. Number one, we've established I'm a Jets fan, but I try to be impartial in my analysis, and there's nothing more impartial than this. I truly believe that Tom Brady is not just the greatest quarterback of all time, but the greatest player in NFL history. As God is my witness, I truly believe that. And number two, the irony about the 2000 NFL draft for the Patriots is despite all those holes the Patriots had, they really didn't hit on a lot of their picks. Obviously, they hit on Brady, and Patrick Pass in the 7th round had a solid career, but Adrian Clem was a bust. J.R. Redmond was a bust. Greg Randall was a bust. It's really crazy how history played out for that. That draft would have been terrible if not for Brady.
No, I think, look, you look at all those players you just mentioned and others, none of them panned out as most Patriots fans couldn't even rattle off the names of the guys that the team picked that year ahead of Brady. You're right. And I think one of the things that's interesting about Belichick is he's done this so many times, like, because the story of Julian Edelman is equally fascinating. I mean, he was picked at like 222 or something, and all the draft reports on Edelman was he's a midget, he's a left-handed quarterback at Kent State, he doesn't belong in the NFL. Like, guys with bodies like him don't play in the NFL. What would you do with this guy? And I think that it's interesting when you look at the analysis that Belichick did on him was he kept wondering, like, how would we use him, but we have to find a way to use him. There's got to be a place for a guy who has that kind of heart. He homed in on Kent State's game against Ohio State when Ohio State was just annihilating them. And here's this left-handed quarterback in the fourth quarter when his team is so far behind they don't have a prayer of winning. And yet this guy's fighting for every last yard, taking on guys that are 3 times his size. And Belichick's thinking that's a guy that we can do something with. Look what he turned out to be.
Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah, and he's going to go down in history as one of the great receivers in the history of the New England Patriots.
Hall of Famer?
You know, that's a great question. I mean, he's borderline. I think that,
I can make the argument for it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people can, and there's obviously people who make the argument against it. But the fact that he's even in the conversation says something amazing when you look at Edelman in his college days. And I just think Bill's done that time and time again. Those are just the 2 most demonstrative examples. But he's just brought lots of guys in over the years that have thrived under his system.
Talking to Jeff Benedict, the author of The Dynasty. So you brought up the Mo Lewis hit a little earlier. Was there a sense of panic within the Patriots when that happened? Obviously, they were concerned about Bledsoe's health and his well-being, but was there a sense of panic on the football side? Like, oh, my God, we have to start this 6th-rounder. Woe is me. We're going to end up losing the rest of our games. Was there that concern?
Well, I interviewed guys like I talked to Willie McGinnis about that, who was one of the captains on the defense at the time.
Yeah.
Ty Law. They had a lot of Teddy Bruschi. I talked to Bruschi about this too. The locker room on the defensive side at that time was full of these veterans who were experienced, who were tough, mentally and physically tough. And their view was, when Drew went down, was just, okay, everybody on our side of the ball has just got to take it up another notch. And instead of holding teams to 14, we've got to hold them to 6. And that was their approach. They never expected much out of Brady. They had very low expectations. I think on the offensive side of the ball, and certainly in the owner's box, there was a tremendous amount of concern. And Robert Kraft had more to worry about than just winning and losing. Bledsoe was the face of the franchise, and he was in the middle of building a new stadium and needing to sell all the luxury boxes and the premium seats. And without Bledsoe, that became a real fear of his. And so Brady's performance in that season, actually was brought a great sense of relief on a number of levels, not just in the locker room.
Was there ever a sense that the Patriots would bring in another quarterback, or was it we're going to ride or die with Brady?
No, they never thought about bringing in anybody else. I mean, they had another quarterback already. So Brady was technically the 3rd-string quarterback in that training camp that year, but Belichick basically moved him up to the 2nd slot and then went with him when Bledsoe went down.
So Belichick has always moved on from players that he feels don't give the Patriots the best chance of winning, whether they be fan favorites, high draft picks, guys on big contracts, whatever. And that really started with him cutting Lawyer Malloy. 2 questions. How hard was the decision to cut Malloy, and how does Belichick objectively apply his quote-unquote cut him a year early rather than a year late philosophy?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything you said except one thing. I don't think it started with Lawyer Malloy. I think it started with Drew Bledsoe a year earlier.
Okay, you can make that argument.
And then Malloy, which was a stunner, but, that offseason, he signed free agent Rodney Harrison as a strong safety, which was what Malloy was. And Malloy was the captain and leading tackler, and so it confused a lot of players on the defense when Rodney Harrison showed up, like, what is he doing here kind of thing. And then when they cut Malloy, when Belichick cut him right before the start of that 02 season, or 03 season, it stunned everybody. And I think had they not turned things around that year and won the way they did, I mean, remember that first game without Malloy, they got crushed by Buffalo 31-0, and Malloy had a huge game for the Bills. But that was when Tom Jackson went on ESPN and basically said publicly that Belichick had lost the locker room, the players hate him, and that lit a fire in the locker room, and it galvanized the players around Belichick. They were furious with him, no doubt, but they didn't take kindly to outsiders saying things like that in public space, and the Patriots went on an incredible run that season. And I think for guys like Bruschi and McGinnis and Rodney Harrison and Ty Law, who was one of Lawyer Malloy's best friends, even Brady, they all, by the end of that season, had fully bought into Belichick's methods. And I think it was Mike Vrabel, it was Vrabel or Izzo, I'm trying to remember which one now, who said, when you play for Belichick, every week is like a tryout. And that's what enabled him to get so much out of those guys every week. They were like playing for their jobs. Yeah,
I think that's a fair analysis. And just one quick thing, Ty Law, former Jet. That's all I have to say.
Yes, that's true.
He played 23 games with the Jets. So the Jets do have another Hall of Famer in Ty Law.
Yep.
So an extremely underrated part of the Patriots dynasty is that they won 3 out of 4 Super Bowls from 01 to 04, took a break from winning them with some help from the Giants in my 2 most hated Super Bowls of all time. I remember crying after the David Tyree helmet catch, and in 2011 I spent the entire Super Bowl party that I was hosting on my computer looking for a new cell phone. That's a true story. And then they won 3 out of 5 Super Bowls from 2014 to 2018. How were they able to resume their winning ways after going 9 years without a ring?
I think that's one of the, most underrated, underappreciated facts in the dynasty history. And that's the unprecedented, unthinkable part. And I think that this is where the owner really shines. He recognized in 2010 that this was about the time that other dynasties preceding them, the 49ers, the Steelers, the Packers, would have unwound. They all ran their course after about a decade. And New England was at that point. And if it had ended in 2010, I think everybody would have looked back and said, hey, that was a great run. They won 3 Super Bowls. They went to 4. They had an undefeated regular season. That's a pretty good run. And it puts them right on an echelon with the 49ers and the Steelers and the Packers. So pretty good. But Kraft felt that Brady had a lot more in the tank, and he knew that he had the greatest coach. And so for him, it became all about how to keep, John Lennon and Paul McCartney together. I mean, that's why I make the comparison in the book. It became all about diplomacy, shuttle diplomacy between Kraft and Brady and Kraft and Belichick. Kraft became the bridge between the quarterback and the coach. He holds them together for the next 10 years. he knew that he had the most driven player. There's nobody more driven than Brady. There's nobody more competitive. There's nobody with a bigger chip on his shoulder than Tom. And then with Bill, he's got this machine-like genius who he's never going to get tired of winning. He's never going to get tired of beating the other guy. And so for Kraft, it was all about how to keep them joined, how to keep them married. And I think that that's why Kraft's role is so important to the back half of the dynasty. I think those last 3 Super Bowl wins against the Seahawks, the Falcons, and the Rams, a lot of the credit has to go to Kraft's diplomacy. Now, obviously, I am not overlooking or short-selling the fact that Brady did what he did in Atlanta, against Atlanta, which was just amazing.
Greatest Super Bowl performance of all time, best Super Bowl ever. I remember watching it. It was crazy.
No debate, no disagreement here. What they did against the Seahawks, that Peter King rightfully called it the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history. It was at the time until 2 years later. And,
right.
And then I think the Super Bowl against the Rams, to me that was sort of, look, it's not as momentous as what they did against Seattle and Atlanta, except for the fact that when you consider how old everybody was at that point, the fact that they won with Gronkowski and Edelman and Brady being, in his 40s, it's like they won that game much more on mental approach than physical performance. They outsmarted the Rams. Belichick far outcoached the Rams coach. I mean,
yes, he did. Sean McVay even said that during a post-game interview that he got outcoached. You're right.
He did. I mean, it's just what you saw then was I make the comparison in the game that was basically the Patriots' Abbey Road. I mean, it was sort of Lennon and McCartney at their pinnacle, and this was Belichick and Brady at their pinnacle. They were doing things with their mind, just the Rams couldn't compete with, and I thought that catch by Gronkowski at the end, when he landed on the goal line, that was sort of his swan song to the league. At least we thought it was at the time. It certainly was to the Patriots.
Yeah.
He was aged, and he looked it on that play, but it was like he dug so deep and made that play, a play that only Gronkowski could make.
No question.
There's no other tight end that makes that play, and I think it's like we were seeing the greatest hits in that game, and the first 3, which were very impressive, but the back 3 were just for the ages. I
am with you there 100%. And I would have had no problem with the Patriots punter winning Super Bowl MVP in that game.
Oh, that guy, all he did was continue to pin the Rams.
Ryan Allen, forgot his name for a sec.
Over and over and over again. It was a field position chess match. And
Johnny Hecker for the Rams, yeah.
Yep.
Crazy. So everyone loves hiring Bill Belichick guys, whether it's front office guys, former coaches, whatever. But I want to focus on the coaches for a sec. You take a look at the Bill Belichick coaching tree. It's not very good when you look at just the NFL. The college guys have had success. Al Groh had a good career at Virginia after his 1 year with the Jets. Sure. And Nick Saban has done a fantastic job at Alabama. But you take a look at the other guys, Eric Mangini, Josh McDaniels, Jim Schwartz, Matt Patricia. They've all failed. Why don't the Belichick assistant coaches work out for the most part?
I sort of look. I think one of the reasons we think that is because, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that when you look at the Parcells coaching tree, it has produced. It's got more guys. Or the Bill Walsh tree. Those are 2 trees, right? Walsh and Parcells.
Right.
They're much more glistening with gold, shall we say, for the head coaches that came from them. Belichick has been at it longer. He's actually had more coaches. They haven't produced the kind of Super Bowl championship runs that the Parcells Walsh pedigree did. But I don't know. I think that. One of the things is he's held on to guys a lot longer. I mean, Josh McDaniels seems like he's been there forever. Would he if he had another chance to be a head coach, would he have turned out to be more like Mike Shanahan or Mike Holmgren? I don't know. It's hard to say, and I don't really know. I just think that you've got guys now in a number of teams in Miami, in New York, in Detroit. All those teams are coached by Belichick guys, and right now, and they're young, and we're going to see how Judge does in New York. I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about Belichick is he still has a pedigree of guys that are out there trying to prove themselves and could become great coaches in the NFL. I mean, time will tell.
Talking to Jeff Benedict, the author of the Dynasty. So this is the question I've been looking forward to asking you the most. What's the full story behind the surgery on Brady's throwing hand on the eve of the 2018 AFC Championship game?
Well, it's one of my favorite chapters to write in the book. I wrote that chapter in one day. Chapters typically take me a lot longer than that, but this one just rolled out because I was sort of able to put the reader in the room when Brady comes into the training room after Rex Burkhead inadvertently smashes into his hand and ruptures it in practice 4 days before the AFC Championship game. The scope and degree of the injury was far more severe than anybody knew or let on at the time. And so this is the first account of what actually happened. And the fact that when the hand surgeon for the Patriots arrived there, he was summoned from Boston to come immediately. He did. And when he walked in and looked at Brady's hand and realized he was able to see down to the bone and tendons in his throwing hand, that he was like, oh my gosh, like this is a real big deal. I don't think anybody thought it was possible that Tom would play in 4 days. Brady himself thought his career was over. The published reports coming out of Foxborough that night were that it was just a small thing and, 3 or 4 stitches to close it up, not a big deal. In fact, it took 25 sutures to close Tom's hand. That's a big injury. It's a big wound. And the reason that I like the chapter so much is because the fact is, if this were any other quarterback, this would be the story that would define his career. But because it's Brady, and there's been the Seahawks Super Bowl and the Falcons Super Bowl and the snow game and, all the things that Brady's done over the years, this is just another game in the long litany of great, remarkable games. It kind of got lost. And it also got lost because no one knew at the time how severe the injury was that he played with. But my favorite moment of that whole story that I tell in the book is on the day of the game, the team asked the surgeon to be there. He normally wouldn't have been there. He's never at games, but they brought him to this game and they had him be in the locker room and ready because they were concerned that there was a real high likelihood that Brady's injury could rupture during the game. I mean, 25 stitches, all it takes is one hand, thing to go wrong, one hit, it could all split open. So they asked him to be there. Well, right before the game started, the whole team is on the field. Everyone's on the field. And the doctor was in the training room setting up his instruments just in case something happened. And then all of a sudden, someone walked into the training room. This is just minutes before kickoff. And he looked up, and it was Brady. And Brady closed the door. He drew the blinds. He sat down at the training table, put his arm across the table, and he asked the doctor to snip off all the tips of the sutures. And the doctor was like, this is crazy. I don't want to do that. If I do that, the sutures could just open right up. And Tom's like, no, I don't like he's telling him he doesn't like the feel of the ball because he's got a bandage over the wound, and he can feel the knots on the sutures through the bandage pressing against the ball, and he doesn't like the feel of it. So he take the bandage off and snip off the tops, and the doctor's like doesn't want to do it. And they get into a negotiation, and the doctor eventually realizes he's going to lose. And so he gets his scissors out, and he starts snipping. Snip, 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 and he snips them all off. And he thinks it's crazy. And when he's done, Tom, thanks him and then walks out. And there's this great scene where he's like his cleats are click-clacking on the concrete as he walks out of the locker room. No one else is around except the doctor, and the doctor's just like, I can't believe I just did that. And then Tom has, one of the games of his life. And afterwards, in the locker room, the doctor was privately telling everyone in the locker room, I can't believe what he just did. And it says so much about who Tom Brady is, and the lengths he will go to compete at the highest level.
No question about that. The guy has the heart of a champion. That there's no debating that, and that's coming from a Jets fan. So I'm sure that everyone's asked you why Brady left. What was the true reason? Are there any juicy stories? Blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do that. I want to ask you a different question. It's similar, but I have a different question. What are the relationships like now between Belichick and Brady, Belichick and Kraft, and Brady and Kraft?
Well, keep in mind that I wrote my story in the book goes all the way up through the pandemic and Brady's departure to Tampa Bay. I mean, that's how current the book is in terms of the end. So
as painful as it was to read, it was a very good book.
I appreciate that. So there hasn't been much water under the bridge, is my point. Since they parted, I think it's a little early to try to assess those relationships, except for this. This, I would say safely, is that I think because of the way it ended, that the Kraft Brady relationship it's really not any different than it ever was. I think it's on a continuum, and there's always going to be a very strong familial bond between the two of them and the Kraft and Brady families. That hasn't changed. In fact, that was probably enhanced by the way they ended things in March. It remains to be seen how over time the relationship with Belichick and Brady may change, but that's because that was largely strictly a business relationship. It was a very effective, very efficient relationship that produced a lot of winning together. Whether it evolves into anything other than that, only time will tell.
Brady announced that he was leaving at like 8:30 in the morning, something like that. And it was during the pandemic, so I was sleeping in. I had nothing to do. My father woke me up, and he said, Jacob, Tom Brady's leaving the Patriots. Immediately went on Twitter, saw that he wasn't lying, and here I am in my pajamas, half asleep, doing a happy dance. That's how elated I was.
I think that the same thing was happening in Buffalo and in Miami.
Definitely.
So, yeah, I mean, and probably in a few other AFC cities like Denver and Indianapolis. But
no question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big change, and I think the Buccaneers are going to be a team that are going to be fascinating to watch this year.
Saints Buccaneers on Sunday, going to be a great game.
Yeah, it will be, no doubt. So.
All right, Jeff, I'll get you out on this. The big question, the question that has plagued Patriots fans and NFL fans for years and decades, and I am not being hyperbolic. Where do you land on the Belichick is responsible for Brady's success / Brady is responsible for Belichick's success spectrum? I'm personally of the opinion that it's a symbiotic relationship. Belichick wouldn't be as good without Brady. Brady wouldn't be as good without Belichick. But I want to know what you think.
Well, I think that what will happen this year is not necessarily a good test of that theory, because I think to really test that theory, we would need to see them separated 15 years ago or 10 years ago and see what it produced. So based on the record we have, I think it's pretty obvious that Belichick made Brady better, and I think Brady makes Belichick better. One of the big things that gets overlooked in that is that I think the way Bill rode Brady and would get on him in practices and in film rooms in front of the team, and sometimes call him names like Johnny Foxborough, which it is impossible for me to imagine Peyton Manning tolerating that, Aaron Rodgers tolerating that, Joe Montana, John Elway, Dan Marino. The greatest quarterbacks that the game has produced in the last, say, 30, 40 years, I don't think any of them would have put up with that and handled it the way Brady did. The reason that's so important is because by Brady getting in line and falling in line and allowing that Belichick to coach him that way, it really forces everyone else to get in line behind him. And you can't say enough about how big that was in the success of the Patriots. When a guy like Randy Moss or Dante Stallworth or Wes Welker or Rodney Harrison or Junior Seau, when those kinds of players show up in New England, Corey Dillon, superstars in their own right, but hadn't won the big one yet, they come to New England and they see Brady not only tolerating this stuff, but just working even harder as Bill does this browbeating. It's impossible if you're Randy Moss to not get in line. And Randy Moss says that in the book. He said, well, you watch this and you go, my gosh, it gets everyone else in the frame of mind that Belichick wants them in. And I think without a quarterback like Tom, I don't think that would have worked. And so I'm of the opinion that it is a team, meaning the two of them are a tandem, and that's why I think Kraft was right. Kraft never valued one over the other. He always felt he needed to have both of them, and that's why he worked so hard to keep them together for 20 years. All
right, Jeff, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that was Jeff Benedict. His book is The Dynasty. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro. Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Yes, that was Jacob from the past. So this is Jacob from the now saying that I conducted an interview about the Patriots for 40 minutes and didn't burst into flames. I'm kind of surprised about that. At least he got my sense of humor with the Jets. I did have a great time talking to him. In all seriousness, I really, really did. NFL preview show coming your way tomorrow morning. Regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show. Also coming tomorrow afternoon. That's going to have an interview with David Fleitz, the author of a book about Eddie Siccotti. Until next time, I am Jacob Valk saying that I've had so many x-rays that my pitches might take on a subtle glow.